Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Throne of Steel based on novel. So let's start. Kia's god's descent had been absorbing the death energy inside this tower eternity since their arrival on the third floor. This god of death's descent was maintained through an incessant purification of that nearby death energy. The death energy in the successive third, fourth and sixth floor was entirely wiped clean, and because the death energy in the first and second floor would not be strong enough to boost this death god much, Kia gave up on it. The reason why she did not unleash the death god's descent's power all this time was to make an ultimate attack. This death god's descent was only affordable after she had the spiritual stove of samsara absorb the spiritual energy of the other four. Right now, she was not only finally making use of God's descent, but moreover completely joining with that incarnation of the god of death, which had already purified so much death energy. This was an unreproducible process, as no other place had such a massive death energy as the Tower of Eternity. If, right now, everyone was to leave the Tower of Eternity, they would take notice that all the specters surrounding it had disappeared, to become instead pure soul force. This was the great purifying ability of death. As Yi Xiaolei said before, Kia, who had inherited the power of death, should be the bane of a necromancer. None of their evil tendencies would show any effect on her. Kia should originally not have had the need to utilize the 7 arts of the god of death so fast, but the situation beat her expectations. Kia had been rating this floor quite highly, but still didn't think that light and darkness could harmonize in such way. This mixture of domains was really too terrifying. Right before, she could be said to be in a situation of life or death. If that ball of light really had been blown on her, the 2 great holy guards' full power would have ignited, causing everyone here to die due to the explosion of light and darkness, including the 2 holy guards whose soul fires would have no way to be preserved. So, Kia took advantage of the fact that these 2 holy guards had the objective to put them to trial, not wipe them all out, which is why they directly stopped their attack midway so fearlessly. This is why these 2 great holy guards had withdrawn their own domains, and now suffered their backlashes. This way, she broke their unity as well as their domain combination, turning around the situation of her great disadvantage. Treading forward, Kia's body became hollow, and her third strike came at the same time darkness and light retracted. Unordinary ripples carrying an incomparable purifying force suddenly showed up. Kia's figure appeared, just like that. She had appeared right on the central point between the 2 great holy guards, the nearest spot to the 2 of them at the same time. Third art of God of Death, Death Scream. The power of the 7 arts of the God of Death harmonized so perfectly with the spiritual stove of samsara and the sickle of the God of Death, that the full display was undoubtedly even above the fusion of Long Houchen's pair of divine swords in strength. However, Kia also had a massive cost to pay. Launching death in purification, Kia chose to lose her sense of sight, which was not amongst the most important in a battle of this level. Right now, her other thought was to return to a state like when she reunited with Long Houchen in Holy City. Her eyes were unable to see, but her heart became all the more peaceful. All kinds of memories she had with Long Houchen flashed through her mind, causing her to enter a special state. In case of utilization, the 7 arts of the god of death needed to be used in succession. Otherwise, if Kia thinks of again using death in childhood later, it will come at the same cost as the third art. They had to be used sequentially, which is why she chose to keep going on. One could see a jade-like halation spread out from Kia's current spot, striking against the 2 great holy guards. The restricting aspect of death towards any undead undoubtedly manifested at this point. The severe attack of Death Scream caused the 2 holy guards of the 9th step to groan once again. The soul fires in their eyes pulsed violently, and cracks even appeared on the forehead of the 2nd holy guard, Darkness Elemental Mage. Death Scream was an attack aimed thoroughly at the soul, using an extraordinary pattern of attack. Any spiritual energy, technique, equipment of defense measure would be totally futile. But it was not an attack of the mental type, as it was also making use of a power exclusive to death, purification. Maybe an infinitely pure person would have no way to get purified, and in that case, Death Scream would show no use, but if some impurity exists in one's mind, or a lot of negative emotions, this death in hissing would be proportionally amplified, up to the level of fracturing the enemy's soul. Without a doubt, the first holy guard using light attribute had a much higher degree of purity, so the second holy guard took far more damage in the impact. The third of the 7 arts of the god of death instantly made her comrades tense. Duan Yi and Yang Wenjiao did not know about the kind of ability Kia was using, but how could it be the case for the others? Originally, back when Kia hadn't yet awakened to the divine power of death, the bursts of power of the spiritual stove of samsara against the enemy would cause her to lose some of her senses for a long duration. Right now, these 7 arts of the god of death were far more terrifying than the original spiritual stove of samsara. These current 7 arts of the god of death were far more terrifying than the previous spiritual stove of samsara. Kia relied on it to withstand these 2 domain-wielding powerhouses. Even with the backing of her comrades' spiritual energies and the god's descent, the backlashes from the spiritual stove were inescapable. Kia's movements didn't come to a stop. Death in childhood, death in cleansing, and death in hissing gave her a strong control of the battlefield. As a god's chosen one, just like Houchen, Kia's awakening should have intensified her strength much more than Long Houchen. But because of the state of her lost memories, her power was still in a state of adaptation. No matter what one could say, Long Houchen became sign of light at the age of 10 years old, and his constitution didn't have a divine tool attached. The divine snail shield of sun and moon was obtained pretty late, when his ability was already well blown. Therefore, although Long Houchen always made the greatest displays of prowess in the team, and had the highest cultivation, in terms of individual strength, Kia was actually above him despite having yet to reach the 8th step. None of Long Houchen's ability could possibly block her whole set of attacks forming the god of death's 7 arts. But Kia's future potential had no way to compare with Long Houchen's. Her gain in strength was only based in her cultivation and the power of her 7 arts. But Long Houchen's future growth was developed from all sides. All things considered, he would surpass her in the end, but this didn't mean anything if he was not alive. Long Houchen having died, Kia no longer exercised restraint hiding behind her lover. Her memories having come back gave her back the entirety of her strength and comprehension of her divine powers of death. Once again blending into nothingness, her overflowing killing intent already filled the whole 6th floor of the Tower of Eternity, and filled it with ashen grey, just as if she had a domain of her own. The instant she disappeared, the darkness mage suddenly trembled severely, the soul fire in his eyes pulsing frantically. Taking long breaths, he could feel that he was Kia's target. At the very moment, the 2 holy guards were withdrawing their spiritual energy, so the light warrior did not have the leeway to save him even if he wanted. In these circumstances, he would only rely on himself. As guardians of the 6th floor of the Tower of Eternity, these 2 holy guards were really extremely powerful, far above the group's expectations. This was not only about the level of their spiritual energy, but the most important point was their control over light and darkness. The darkness mage revoked his staff the instant Kia disappeared, and placed it against his chest. Immediately, a purplish-black radiance broke out from his chest. It turned into a 2-meter-tall purplish-black, colored ball wrapping all around him, just like a purple full moon suddenly arising in there. Domain control, internal release for self-defense. Right, that purplish-black was still his domain's power, but under his great control, the domain was contracted by force, being brought down to a diameter of 2 meters, making it far more powerful than before in a small scale. Being able to accomplish such a feat, after sustaining 2 successive powerful backlashes, really showed the great attainment attained by the Dark Mage in cultivation. As it took shape, Kia appeared right above his head with no forewarning. A diamond-shaped grey crystal had at some point appeared on Kia's forehead. As the sickle of the god of death slowly descended, that grey crystal immediately let out myriads of grey rays, all of which instantly gathered as an extension of the sharp blade. Next, the sickle of the god of death made way inside that purplish-black colored ball. A sparkling grey color intruded into that substantial purplish-black domain, as if it was cutting through butter, as it made its way inside. 4th of the 7 arts of the god of death, Death God's Kiss. Such a tyrannical domain was actually still split in 2 by this attack. One could clearly see myriad grey rays abruptly shooting through that purplish-black ball, crushing over half of the domain. The remaining half of the domain instantly weakened, and one could clearly see that dark mage retire to the remaining half of the domain. His staff-grasping right hand was completely smashed to pieces and purified by the grey radiance. But at the same time, the light warrior from the other side moved. In a glow of bright light, the heavy sword grasped in both his hands was brandished over his head. An intense sunshine seemed to become one with him as his gold-red figure flashed like lightning in the midst of frantic accelerations. This attack seemed able to split the earth, just like the unsurpassable sunfire. Kia shifted her stance, flinging her now ash-grey-colored hair back, scattering it away. Just like a grey waterfall, it traced an arc, whirling at slow speed. The grey diamond-shaped crystal on her forehead disappeared, but an incomparably strong and vigorous grey radiance emerged from her chest. All the surroundings suddenly slowed down. Kia was moving slowly, but that light warrior, who was originally dashing at a light speed, also slowed down. The movements of the two became very distinct. In this process of slowdown, a transparent grey entity emerged from Kia's body, that was similar to Kia, but illusory and transparent-looking. Her hands kept forming seals in front of her chest, and the grey figure flashed, marking extremely complex runes onto Kia's back. Fifth of the 7 arts of the god of death, death's silent annihilation. In the process of slowdown, the next instant after those grey runes were marked into her back, the sickle of the god of death turned into 7 other weapons of the same shape, the first being the slowest while every next one was a bit faster, with each one following each other. At the time the sickle swept at the already seriously wounded darkness mage, the 7 sickles made one, and a translucent ash-grey blade projection was shot at the darkness mage, before flying toward the rushing light mage. That blade projection was extremely bizarre. Its main part was like a substantial crystal of a grey color, but all around the blade converged circles of intense white light, which revolved all around it. It did not emit killing intent nor death energy, but gave off, just at the sight of it, a choking feeling. The instant that blade projection flew off, space and time returned to normal, all speeds reinstated to their original state right, before the sword of that light mage clashed against that annihilating projectile. The darkness mage under Kia's feet directly disappeared into a grey fog, and his powerhouse's soul integrated with the eternal melody in a black flash. An ear-piercing sound of friction came from a white smoke. It was a thrust of intensity comparable to a red-heated piece of iron clashing against a piece of ice. In that quick impact, all the domain power of the light warrior was gathered at once to block, his whole body stagnating in the sky. The intense golden-red radiance emanating from his body was shrouded in the midst of a drizzling white halation, clashing against the light essence dispersed from his body. That white light was the annihilating light of purification, attached to the 5th of the 7 arts of the god of death, able to purify any elemental essence. Even an elemental attack of much stronger properties would get substantially consumed and purified. Although the light warrior was making use of the light attribute, he was, after all, an undead creature born from a soul of a powerhouse, making the light of purification his bane. In addition, even with the support of his domain's power, his originally quite wounded state made it very hard for him to rush out from the eroding light of purification. Kia! The whole group cried out unknowingly in alarm. Kia had already had to use 5 of the 7 arts of the god of death since the beginning of the fight, but she still showed no signs of stopping. A grey path extended underneath her, over the midst of which she stayed afloat. On the surface, the current Kia looked no different than normal, as if none of that had affected her. But everyone could clearly see that when the 7 arts of the god of death reached such a level, the backlash inflicted on her could only be equally fearful. As the light warrior managed to expel most of the corroding effects of the annihilating purification, the grey path had extended underneath him. The next instant, Kia moved, just like a grey butterfly throwing itself at that light warrior, who had holy fire ascending over his body. The current Kia was in an extraordinary state of mind. The sickle of the god of death launched an attack at astonishing speed. As a translucent blade projection shone upon him, the soul fire in the eyes of the light warrior pulsed in extreme terror. First of the 7 arts of death, death in childhood. Second art, cleansing death. Third art, death's scream. Fourth art, death god's kiss. Fifth art, death's silent annihilation. The 5 consecutive supreme arts that were launched in a spurt united as one, unleashing the inevitable might of the death god, a journey in the incomparable land of death. And that was the 6th art of the god of death, death in journey. The unity of the 5 arts formed this 6th absolute force. The first art, death in childhood, forced the light warrior to using his heavy sword to barely resist with his all, but the second art filled his swords with cracks, his whole body once again shrouded in light of purification. Then death's scream locked his body in a stiff state, before death god's kiss and death in silent annihilation flashed in turn. Kia appeared right behind the light warrior. Flashes of grey and white colors slowly dispersed, and a faint halation flashed through. Kia stood there silently, her hands holding the handle of the sickle of the god of death. She looked extremely calm, as the ash-grey radiance on her body dispersed at an astonishing speed. But from her straight posture, she was not in any state of weakness. The frozen light instantly turned into fine powder, before a golden radiance traced an arc to arrive in front of Kia, and enter into the eternal melody hanging on her chest. Success. She had just succeeded, relying on the power of 6 of the 7 arts of the god of death, in crushing 2 holy guards of the 9th step able to unite their domain. In front of the death god, the great might of light and darkness withered away in purification. The saint daughter of Samsara Kia had just succeeded. She had to use all she had, but she managed to break through the 6th floor of this tower of eternity. At the very moment, she seemed to be in a far lighter state than her previously desperately wounded comrades, but the deeply wounded Chen Yinga and Wang Yuanyuan were the ones unable to refrain from their overflowing tears. They didn't know about the backlash that Kia had to sustain after using these 6 arts of the god of death, and all were afraid that this backlash would last for a very long duration. Kia was standing calmly, but the next instant, her body suddenly shivered. Deep halations dispersed from her chest. First was a red, then a blue, a green, a yellow, a black, and finally golden halations circling back and forth and flickering around each other, causing Kia's fair figure to let out a dazzling light. As this multicolored radiance flickered, the whole tower of eternity lit up, and this multicolored light shone in the midst of the tower of eternity. That was a dazzling lighting, giving off an indescribable feeling of brightness. This whole radiance came out from the eternal melody hanging on Kia's chest. Her body kept shivering lightly, and the next instant, the multicolored radiance on Kia's body shone even more remarkably. Making use of the 6 arts of the god of death already drew out her whole power. If not for the fusion process the spiritual stove of Samsara had undergone, she would be nothing more than a walking corpse right now. The first art of death in childhood didn't cause any backlash, but starting from the 5th, the backlash would affect her whole body. The disappearance of the senses in all one's body will result in death. And right now, Kia had only her 6th sense left, perception. Her vision, hearing, taste, smell and touch had already disappeared, leaving her left with only her perception. This instant, she was already incomparably weakened, to the extent that she was not even able to raise a finger, as she made the astonishing discovery of a mystical force surging out from her body, causing a massive amount of surrounding energy to gather onto her body. A feeling of warmth spread through her whole body, causing her incomparable feeling of weakness to disappear swiftly, as the spiritual energy in her body was replenished at an astonishing speed. Which was to say that this force was on the same level as the post-fusion spiritual stove of Samsara. In fact, this was the force belonging to the Tower of Eternity, belonging to the holy necromancer, slumbering calamity Elux. The multicolored halation gained in intensity with Kia in its midst, causing her darkened skin to recover its original gloss. To her shock, Kia found out that her lost senses were unexpectedly recovering. She was not the only one experiencing this kind of feeling. Although the center of this multicolored light was her other comrades were directly exposed to that light, including Long Houchen lying on the ground, who was also cleansed by this multicolored light. The other heavily wounded teammates recovered at an astonishing speed from their injuries, the same going even for Zhong Fangfang and Wang Yuanyuan's lost vital force. This light was really beyond miraculous. No known healing forbidden spell could compare with that elemental force of incomparable purity. This instant, everyone could sense the elemental gods of fire, water, wind, earth, light, and darkness descending and joining their forces to heal the whole group's injuries. Kia gradually felt flashes of understanding filling her. Right, all the tests they had to bear were so challenging, and they could only rely on their own power to pass through. The eternal melody didn't give them any kind of help, and some of them were narrowly killed during the trials. But this was in the end a trial, not a battle to death. No matter what kind of a cruel person the holy necromancer Elux could be, he had left this place for the sake of choosing a successor to inherit his great strength, and not to cause destruction. So, after everyone passed through this 6th trial, everything seemed to be over, which is why the Tower of Eternity caused this powerful 6-elemental recovering light to descend, helping them to recover from their wounds and replenishing them in energy. Elux wouldn't want a completely bruised disciple, let alone one wounded beyond recovery. The first ones to recover were Lin Xin, Han Yu, Yang Wenjiao and Duan Yi, who had left all their spiritual energy to Kia, and even had some damage in their channels due to that. But it took them under 10 minutes to recover fully, with a capacity of spiritual energy even above their original peak. This was due to the development of their capabilities through incessant battles. The next one was Chen Yinga, whose face gradually regained red tints. Managing to get up under Yang Wenjiao's assistance, she felt her depleted strength coming back slowly, and half an hour later, she had the pleasant surprise to find out about her total recovery. How bizarre! Right after recovering entirely, that multicolored radiance started to avoid her and stop integrating. This instant, the different degrees of the other's wounds were visible. Sima Xian, Wang Yuanyuan, and Zhong Fangfang were already soaked in the light for no less than 1 hour, and it was about the same for the distant Kia. And that multicolored light was maintained as if it had no limits. After another hour passed, Zhong Fangfang and Wang Yuanyuan opened their eyes simultaneously, filled with great joy as their vital forces were already recovered fully. It was not that Wang Yuanyuan's injuries were not as severe as Sima Xian. In reality, she had already sacrificed her life at that time, and was originally supposed to be dead, but Zhong Fangfang was there to share that backlash of hers, as well as offering a half of his vital force to her. Sima Xian's recovery took close to 4 hours to complete. As he groped his bald head while standing up, everyone couldn't help but cheer for him. That was the feeling of being done with the hard times. Their struggles and sacrifices were being paid back, and the more severe their wounds were, the more they gained from the Tower of Eternity's trials. For instance, Sima Xian's internal spiritual had directly soared to the 8th rank of the 7th step, nearing closely the 8th step. The same went for Wang Yuanyuan and Zhong Fangfang, but because they had originally higher levels of cultivation, their upgrade was not as great as Sima Xian. The others were also boosted more or less greatly. Their cheers didn't last for long before coming to normal, because that multicolored light did not disappear after their recovery. The light was still there, seemingly gathered only on those two, Long Haochen and Kia. What a strange thing to behold! Long Haochen was clearly already dead, yet that multicolored light kept rushing forth inside his body. And the same went for Kia. The two of them had become the cause of this multicolored halation. Will Boss resurrect like that? Lin Xin raised the question with traces of hope. Han Yu silently shook his head, not likely. After all, Boss is already dead. See, the wound on his chest doesn't show any traces of recovery. The demon god Emperor's strength is just that terrifying, that injury is impossible to treat, to say nothing about resurrecting him. It looks like we will have to head for the 7th floor of the Tower of Eternity. But where is the 7th floor? Kia has already passed through the 6th floor, but how come there is no pathway for the 7th floor showing up? Chen Yinga asked in incomprehension. Zhong Fangfang responded, for now, we can only wait. Maybe it will come out by itself after this multicolored light terminates. Wang Yuanyuan remarked with some worries, hopefully they can make it fast. Boss could only last for 7 days, and that's without including the time needed to resurrect him. We have already used up 2 days, so we have only 5 days left. Sima Xian remarked, that's already pretty good. We have 5 days left, they can't possibly keep absorbing this light for such a long time. Time passed, minutes after minutes. 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours. 12 hours. When no less than 12 hours had passed, the group started to get anxious. How much longer would this last? Right, because of this, they couldn't help but secretly admire Kia. After each of them recovered fully, the assimilation of the multicolored light stopped immediately. The already deceased Long Houchen aside, Kia certainly made it back alive after this battle, yet this multicolored light soaked her for a whole 12 hours, which was not even enough for her to recover entirely. From this one could see the terror of the backlash from the 7 arts of the god of death. As everyone started to grow more and more worried, the multicolored light in the sky suddenly dimmed down, vanishing slowly. Kia opened both her eyes as this multicolored radiance disappeared from sight. Kia! Everyone immediately rushed to her in excitement. Sima took Long Houchen's corpse in his arms before running to join Kia's side. Chen Yinga grabbed Kia's arm, attentively watching her face. "How are you, Kia? So the backlash of your 7 arts of the god of death was..." Kia showed a faint smile. "I didn't expect my backlash to actually disappear. It seemed to get counteracted by the ability of this Tower of Eternity." "That's great!" Chen Yinga immediately shouted in joy. They all knew that upon reaching the 6th of the 7 arts of the god of death, Kia's backlash would very possibly persist for several years, and some part of her may not ever recover again. As everyone was soaked in joy, Kia's chest suddenly lit up. This phenomenon was not the same as the previous multicolored radiance. Through Kia's clothes, the skull-shaped pendant started to make noises. The necklace binding it disappeared in the midst of a brilliant light. That golden skull slowly floated above Kia's head, its small eyes suddenly lighting up. 2 tiny but extremely brilliant golden flames pulsed up. Suddenly, the 2 lights inside its eyes shot like 2 needles toward the end of the 6th floor. Everywhere the golden light passed, the originally hazy-looking 6th floor was lit up, and at its end, another sculpture of Elux came into view. This sculpture was entirely gold-colored, with only the hearts spot-colored black. From the point of view of the group, a black flame seemed to ascend above it. A brilliant body, even with a dead heart soaked in darkness. Maybe this was the truest portrayal of the slumbering calamity Elux. Compared to the sculpture of the 5th floor, this one faintly gave out a much sadder feel. The rays shot from the eyes of the golden skull coming from the eternal melody entered into the eyes of this sculpture of the slumbering calamity, and immediately, an intense golden flame ignited in result, as the whole 6th floor was set aflame. From the outside, a pillar seemed to form from these intense golden flames. The death energy that Kia had originally cleansed there abruptly became rich, and in the midst of the intense death energy appeared countless departed spirits filled with negative feelings. In such an environment, an incomparably rich light energy arose. This instant, the concentration of light essence in this 6th floor of the Tower of Eternity even exceeded that of the divine snail shield of sun and moon at the time they had found it in the swamps of gloom. Only, although the light essence was massive and rich, it was filled with bits of malevolence, completely unlike the peaceful feelings the divine snail shield originally used to let out. The pairs of massive pillars set to fire, the whole 6th floor became entirely illuminated. An intense golden halation spread out in the sky, and that light energy kept growing in intensity, giving off to Kia's group the feeling of getting soaked in a lake of light essence. Counting Sima's yarn, a total of 5 light users were present. But they didn't dare absorb the slightest bit of this rich light essence. This light essence permeated inside an extensive energy of death, giving them unawares strong feelings of rejection. Only Kia preserved a natural expression. As the one chosen by the god of death, any spectral and death energy around her body would only need a moment before dispersing. An aged voice suddenly sounded out from all 4 directions. That was a kind of soul transmission that Kia would be able to hear even after losing all her 6 senses. "Welcome to the 6th floor of the Tower of Eternity. The fact you made it here proves that you are strong enough to succeed to me. Step on these last stairs. I will be waiting for you on the 7th floor. You only have to meet me face to face and I will make you my disciple. Otherwise, there will be no connection between the 2 of us." The aged voice did not carry any emotional vibes. If Long Houchen was still alive, he would definitely be able to tell everyone that this voice was exactly the same as the one he had heard the first time he stepped into the Tower of Eternity. The only difference was that it was not as cordial back then, and sounded extremely cold instead. This video will end here.